Hope you're well. This week I'm going to be reading some books recommended by Mindy Kaling. So Never Have I Ever season 4, which is the last season of the show, comes out this week, and so I wanted to read some books that were recommended by Mindy Kaling. She is kind of my idol, you know, she has the job that I've always wanted. I want to be a showrunner, you know. It doesn't have to be now, it doesn't have to be in the next 20 years, but in my life I want to be a showrunner one time, you know. She has my ideal career and therefore she is my idol, and she's one of the only South Asian women who like sort of are in this career. She's definitely one of the most famous women in this career, let alone the most famous South Asian woman in this career. So I think that's quite cool, and I very much look up to her, even though, you know, she has her flaws. I think people criticize her a lot, but I think a lot of the criticism that gets sort of like thrown towards her is weird. I think there's lots to criticize about Mindy Kaling, but I think the majority of people, I think, criticize her in places where she doesn't need criticism, and then sort of don't really talk about anything that needs to be spoken about in regard to Mindy Kaling with nuance that's necessary. But I have a film degree and I am South Asian. I am built in with the nuance that's necessary to actually have a conversation about Mindy Kaling, so leave the Mindy Kaling criticism to me. You get me? Regardless of any of that, she is the it girl to me, you know? I don't care what you think. Everything about her intrigues me, her personal life, her career, her writing, the way that she's got to where she is, you know? So I want to read some books that she thinks are good. Some like random books she's recommended over the years. The first one I'm going to read is a recent read that she recommended. So she recommended a book called Kismet, and it is about the wellness community. So it's about our main character, who is a Pakistani woman who moves from New York, and she leaves behind all her community and family to move to a town in LA with her wellness coach, and essentially gets sort of mixed up with a string of murders that are happening within this wellness community. And I think that's an interesting idea, because wellness communities are just like weird and creepy anyway, and to be a South Asian woman in a white wellness community is even weirder, especially since a lot of wellness practices, spirituality, yoga kind of comes from like South Asian culture anyway. So I want to see kind of like where that goes, how that would be criticized, or whether it's criticized at all, and I'd like to just see what the payoff is. So it's a thriller, and I'm not really a big thriller person, I'm not really a mystery person, that's not really a genre I ever really touch, so I am intrigued to see where that goes, because it has a South Asian main lead, and I don't feel like this genre really has that a lot, so that's quite interesting too. So the second book that I'm going to be reading is House of Mirth, and so she kind of says that she read this when she was younger. I think she says she read it in like 9th grade or something. That's what I saw online anyway. And this is a book about a woman who's sort of living life in high society in New York in the early 1900s, and kind of just like what happens to her and her pursuit of a husband as she's sort of on the later side of getting married. She's been out in society and sort of like in the marriage pool for about 10 years, but she's not married, and that's sort of starting to cause problems. And essentially the book is about how she gets over that, and whether anything changes in her life, or how it gets better, how she's able to sort of play the game to her advantage within high society in New York. I'm excited to read this because I do like this setting. I know that these two things I'm going to say are not similar, but I really liked the show The Gilded Age, and I know that's like a bit earlier in like history than when this was going to be set, but I really like New York as a setting in like sort of period dramas, because you don't get a lot, because I guess like America's a bit newer, so you don't really get that many period dramas about it unless it's like in 1900s. So I'm excited to see what this kind of has. Plus also, it'd be nice to see the actual sort of old money versus new money thing, because I think there's this real like rise of like femininity coaching and all that, where it's like, get yourself an old money man or whatever to like sort of see yourself be set for life. But it's like old money and new money are very different to just like aesthetics, because old money is very much like landed gentry getting money from being a landowner, landlord, and also, you know, sort of having a title perhaps. And new money is about like earning your money, which is not exactly what people I guess now think when they think of old money. It's much more of an aesthetic, it's much more about exclusivity as an idea. So it'll be nice to actually see something that sort of talks about this in like a proper way, in a way that's like what new money and old money actually means, instead of sort of what it's sort of been bastardized to mean now. And the third book that I'm going to be reading is The Namesake. So this was already on my reading list, so I was like much more excited to read this because it means I get to read something that I've already wanted to read plus something that she wanted to read, and that is a book by Jhumpa Lahiri. I think that's how you say her name. I actually don't know. Jhumpa. I'm just in my head it's like Jhumka, but like Jhumpa Lahiri, and she really likes this author. She's like recommended lots by this author, but I only really wanted to read one book by this author. And she also named her character Mindy Lahiri after Jhumpa Lahiri from the Mindy Project. So the main character that Mindy plays in the show is named after this author, which I think is really sweet and really cool. So that is another reason why I'm really excited to actually read this book, because like if you're that inspired by someone, I think that's an interesting and compelling enough reason to read one of their books, as in like I'm interested to see why she was so compelled to name her character after this author. So this book actually follows a family that moves from India to America and sort of them settling there and sort of their life there. It follows the mother and the son, I think, and sort of like how they've adapted to living there and what it's like, sort of the immigrant experience. And as someone who's sort of seen this idea of like moving to another country to get an arranged marriage and then have your child, I've seen that dynamic in real life within our like South Asian communities, but it's not my like lived experience. My parents aren't specifically like that, so it'll be interesting to read about this, especially in an American context because I'm English, and I think sort of the idea of arranged marriages and class is very different in America than it is here, so that will be interesting to sort of actually be able to read from somebody who probably has actually lived some of that experience or known that bit more than I have, just because I think there are just generally class differences between the type of people who immigrate to America and the people who immigrate to England. But in general, I'm just really excited to read this because I will always be excited to read a South Asian narrative regardless, but this is also contemporary fiction and already on my reading list, as I said before. So again, just a lot of things stacking up to make this one probably my favourite of the three that I'm going to read. Okay, so I'm like only 20 minutes into this audiobook and I'm already like, okay, I don't know about this one. I don't know about this one at all. Mindy, please, I can't spend the next 5 hours reading this for it to be bad. I don't think I'm gonna read it all at once, but still, like, it's not looking good. It's not written well. We'll see how it progresses though, because we're only on like chapter 4. The chapters are very short. That helps, but I don't know. Finally got round to watching Never Have I Ever, right? And I actually have a Pavlovian response of like hatred towards her because I hated her character in Teen Wolf. Like, I simply cannot stand seeing her face. I'm so sorry to this actress. Sorry, what just happened?
We got a hate crime.
I don't know how to park a car, and this car park is the worst. It's like, why is it busy on a Friday afternoon? It's 2 o'clock, okay? Like, surely there's not this many unemployed people. Like, where is this coming from? I need to know. Because I'm like, I struggle to park, and then I park badly because I don't want people to look at me parking badly. And then I go and run, and then the entire run I'm thinking about how badly I parked. It's not very good. So now, having read all of them, I'm gonna do the debrief of all of the books. So, Kismet, the first one that I read, it was kind of boring at times, and I feel like it really dragged at many scenes throughout. And I mean, I don't really read a lot of thrillers, so I'm not sure how good the writing in those are, especially since they're kind of regarded as a sort of trashier genre. But this was kind of written very amateurish. It just felt a little off, and the dialogue in general was not very realistic, and the characters were not very engaging. I felt like I never should be rooting for or against any character because none of them ever pulled any emotion out of me. Though, in my opinion, the character motivations for some characters were written well. like why a character did things and how they approach situations were very nicely thought out and foreshadowed, especially with Ronnie, the main character, who as a very anxious person makes a lot of hesitant and at times annoying decisions. But these actions are very defined by her life, so I liked that aspect. That was well written. And also, I know this sounds like high school feedback, but I felt like there was a lot of telling and not showing. There was a lot of sort of explanations of things instead of descriptions of places and feelings. I will say, however, the best thing about this was that I definitely didn't guess the ending. I don't read a lot of mystery and therefore I was thrown by it, but I think if someone was maybe either more engaged by this book somehow or a more experienced thriller reader, they would not have been as shocked. Plus, I think there's very little actual thought-provoking criticism of the wellness community like I'd previously expected. Instead, there's just sort of like snarky comments here and there, which I felt lacked depth, considering the fake sincerity of the community seemed to be the main issue that the author wanted to tackle, aside from like the mystery plot that was happening. And the lack of criticism is really evident in the character of Marley, who is the wellness coach character for Ronnie, who I thought was incredibly uniquely constructed until the very end. So as a white woman who wanted fame and power within a wellness community setting, she weaponizes her white femininity constantly, which I thought was written in a very like distinctly realistic way. Aside from everything else that's not very realistic, I think she was the best written thing about the entire book. Yet the ending, as many stories who actually write this character archetype, doesn't want to admit that some white women are just horrible because they are manipulative in this way. Like, some women are not outwardly racist because not every racist screams obscenities or threatens. Like, racism takes many forms, and one of which is microaggressions. But also, especially, the ability to be a bystander in the face of other people's racism, which is something this book just refuses to confront properly at the end. And since this aspect of the main character is such a major part of the book, it makes the novel as a whole feel really reductive and like there's no message within the story at all. In general, I found this book to be quite bland, but I do believe in brown mediocrity sort of persevering in a way, especially in media spaces, and this does have a South Asian lead who is both middle-aged and single and doesn't have a love interest pushed on her by the end, so it is a win in one regard. So the next one is House of Mirth, and I really like female characters generally who are witty and selfish and self-indulgent, and that's exactly what Lily Bart, who is our protagonist, is all about. The book follows her as she sort of navigates life through high society, and spoiler, kind of, her also descent into poverty. The characters are very fascinating, in my opinion, to uncover because they all have agendas that affect the narrative in different ways. Side note, I did read this on audiobook, so I did find it kind of hard to remember every character's social standing and whether they had money or not, which is a little bad of me because those are like very important characteristics within this novel. And also the book transverses through like so many scenes and settings that it did feel really hard to keep up with. Like, every chapter had at least 3 different settings and 4 different sets of characters. However, I still love reading about the class dynamics and how they affected the world they all lived in, so that kept me hooked throughout since class was constantly in balance for Lily Bart. My only real gripe with this book, however, is that she doesn't have a good ending, which I feel is always the case for a character that is in any way sort of troublesome or conniving, and this always saddens me because, especially at the time this was written, women didn't really have much else to bargain with other than their wit and wiles. Anything else is sort of in the possession of a man. It's all they had to get by. And for women who use their own intelligence and intuition to kind of always be left broken at the end did feel, a little frustrating, even though women like this probably did win in some way when they existed. And since this story was written as a reflection of contemporary society in the early 20th century, I can assume publishers wouldn't have allowed a female character who wasn't entirely morally upright to be the protagonist without ending up a pariah, which is a damn shame. I also hope that some stories that perhaps talk about this era are able to show kind of conniving, horrible characters come out on top, because, if they're written now, there's not that much pushback from publishers or, like, creators to, not show women in a bad light, because that would be horrible or whatever. So the last one I read was The Namesake, and as expected, it was, like, my favourite of all 3 that I read. I love the story and the message of the story. The Namesake follows the trail of Gogol, the central figure, though not really the protagonist of this story, and his relationship with his name. So how he feels about his name being Gogol, which is actually, interestingly enough, a Russian name and not a Bengali name, which is the ethnicity the main characters are in this, that he dislikes, which is perhaps actually more unusual since immigrant children usually dislike their ethnic names because of how it hinders them in their day-to-day life, as people can't always, pronounce them. The story explains that there's like a Bengali tradition of having a good name, which is your formal name, and your nickname for your home life, and that Gogol should have been his nickname but accidentally eventually actually became his real formal name. The story actually spans his life into his 30s and what it's like as a second-gen immigrant. The plot itself is not super invigorating, but the story is more propelled by Gogol kind of like learning like this idea of self and accepting his identity. He's not really so outwardly self-hating as some South Asian characters are, but simply feels an unease at being different and drawing attention for that reason. I think the writing is very clear whilst also being able to be heartfelt as Gogol explores his life, and because of this, when Gogol lives his life in any capacity, there is a sense of endearment and closeness to him, like we want what's best for him the whole way. Separately, there's a really fascinating point of view in this book on both interracial and same-race relationships that I've never seen explored anywhere, especially not in regard to like South Asian characters, which I thought was really exciting to finally read here. And I will say, having now read this book, I'm absolutely ready to read other books by Jhumpa Lahiri. I think her importance in South Asian literature is not oversold, and I'm very excited to read some other stuff by her. So I think from reading these, I can kind of tell that Mindy Kaling clearly cares about her identity and is not unaware of it. Whilst I think she recommends Kismet, which is the first book, simply because she likes thrillers and this book has a South Asian heritage, which is like sort of a big part of the story, House of Mirth, on the other hand, shows that she has an interest in dislikable characters, class dynamics, and drama, all of which are like very plentiful in her own work, and also I think is corroborated a little bit by the fact that she also recommended Emma by Jane Austen in like her recommendations over time, which also follows an unlikable, self-centered main character. And I didn't read that one for this vid because I've already read it, and it's a very good book. 4 out of 5 on Goodreads. Would read again. Probably will read again. There is obviously a lot of criticism around her perhaps being self-hating, but I've not really known that to be true. Instead, I think she's always sort of told her own story of evolving from the belief that being brown or Indian is cringe or stifling into how she's definitely now proud of her heritage. And seeing her kind of be a massive fan of Jhumpa Lahiri's work, I can see that she's definitely engaged with literature that's sort of like confronted the idea of unease within identity and the resistance of accepting your entire immigrant identity. And reading The Namesake has only really further proved to me that she's not really the person that a lot of media illiterate people, in my opinion, come onto the internet to sort of hate her for. She simply only has personal lived experiences of being in predominantly white spaces and how that can shape a person. And so that is what she's written like about until this point. I do, however, see this changing. I believe that her work will expand to include many different types of South Asian identities, not in the ethnic sense, but in like the idea of being a person, especially as she works with a broader spectrum of South Asian writers and creators. That's all I have to say on that. I recommend reading The Namesake for sure. So yeah, take care and thank you for watching. I don't know what I'm doing.